Hey guys, this is Jimmy. I wanted to make a quick video today talking about Weezing specifically and how it fits into the Regulation E VGC meta. I actually had made a video and recorded most of it and almost got it ready to upload a couple days ago, and then I didn't do that. And then now I wanted to re-record it because something relevant happened with Weezing recently. Wolfe Glick actually just won a huge online tournament of, I think it was about 200 people, on Limitless on Limitless, and actually ended up winning the whole tournament using a Weezing team. And I kind of wanted to reframe how I wanted to talk about this video. Anyway, moving forward, let's talk about Weezing. Weezing's a weird little dude. For those who don't know, Weezing gets an ability called Neutralizing Gas, which shuts off the abilities of every other Pokemon on the field, and this also takes priority over every other ability before anything else can activate. So as long as Weezing is on the field, no other abilities will activate as long as it exists. And what this means is Weezing actually has a really good spot right now to just completely neuter a lot of team strats, specifically revolving around those that use abilities. I'm going to talk about that more in detail here in a minute, but I want to go ahead and go over the rest of Weezing's toolkit. But Weezing is actually a very defensive Pokemon right now too. Being a mono poison type and not having any other type is actually pretty solid right now. The only thing that's really going to threaten a Weezing is going to be something that can spam really hard-hitting ground type moves or psychic spam. And we'll go over how that works here in a minute as well. But it actually has a really good defensive profile too. It's a very physically defensive mon with 120 base stats as its defensive stat, which is really good. Not super high HP or special defense, but you can definitely calc this thing to live whatever you kind of need it to live. If you want this thing to be an absolute physical wall, you can definitely spec it to do that. But if you wanted it to be a bit more balanced and have a bit more special defense, be able to take specific hits, you can definitely do that as well. I think it really just depends on what you need and how you want to fit it into your team. Another thing that makes Weezing really good is it has a really good supportive move pool. It gets access to both Taunt and Will-O-Wisp, which are huge deals in VGC standards, right? Being able to taunt something to make sure a Trick Room doesn't go off, taunting a Moongus, making sure that it can't go for Rage Powders or Spores is huge. And then having Will-O-Wisp on something that's this physically defensive is a really big deal, which it just allows you to like really cripple a lot of physical threats without having to worry about going down before you get the Will-O-Wisp off. And given how physical the meta is at the moment, having this profile with this ability to be able to just cripple something is a really, really big deal. Now, Weezing isn't very offensive, only having a base 90 or 85 in its respective attack stats, but it does get access to some interesting moves for that too. If we look at its physical side, it only really gets Gunk Shot with its stab poison coverage, which isn't great. It does get Gyro Ball, so if you're running a slow Weezing, that's a decent option into the fairy types. It does get Explosion, but you're not really going to use that a whole lot. But then if we look at the special move pool, it gets access to Clear Smog, which is actually a really good answer into some Dondozo matchups or Pokemon that have manual setup like Swords Dance or Nasty Plot, anything like that. It has access to Fire Blast and Flamethrower to hit your Grass or Steel types specifically, since you're not going to be able to touch the Steel types with your poison coverage. And it also has just a decent stab in Sludge Bomb as well. I'm a big advocate for running a physical Weezing with Gunk Shot. Gunk Shot specifically has the ability to just one-shot Ogre Pawns before they get any Terastallization going. If you get a Gunk Shot onto a Terra Fairy Flutter main or anything that's already Terra Fairy'd at that point, it's going to do a lot of damage. 120 base power is nothing to scoff at, and you also have a 30% chance to poison the target. I think Weezing, you're definitely always going to want to run Protect on it as well. Just making sure that you can keep your neutralizing gas on the field as long as possible is what makes this Pokemon so good, so having an option to go for Protect is really helpful for that. It does also get access to Pain Split if you wanted to go for a bit more recovery option to make sure you have a little bit self-sustained. That's a good idea. Getting a Pain Split off onto something like Dondozo or Iron Hands is a really big deal, right? Since they have a really high HP pool. So that's definitely also something to consider. But I think for the most part, if you're running Weezing, you're almost always going to be running Taunt and Will-O-Wisp. So at that point, it's about having what kind of coverage move do you want to have, be it Sludge Bomb, Gunk Shot, or maybe something else like Flamethrower, but I don't think you're really going to run that very much. And then Protect, most likely. I think this is pretty much the standard moveset here. If you're not running Gunk Shot, since it's a little bit more inconsistent, you're definitely going to be running Sludge Bomb instead. Where is that? There it is. So I think this would be the standard move pool. It does get access to, or it doesn't get access to, but it has a lot of good items are really helpful for this thing. Rocky Helmet is really good for its defensive profile, being able to absorb hits from the likes of Urshifu, or Stomping Tantrum from Landorus, or Ice Spinner, or Sucker Punch from Chien-Pao. Having Rocky Helmet Chip is always really good, especially on something that can burn things and is also very physically defensive. It benefits a lot from Citrus Berry also, just being able to, again, keep itself on the field for a lot longer. Going back to Gunk Shot, I am actually a huge advocate for Wide Lens on Weezing. I think Weezing's biggest issue is the fact that it doesn't exert a lot of offensive pressure on its own, and Will-O-Wisp on itself is already an inconsistent move with only 85 accuracy. And if you run Gunk Shot and Will-O-Wisp, you have a huge chance to miss your moves, a good chance of the time. So what I like to do is I've actually been running a Wide Lens set to boost the accuracy of Will-O-Wisp and Gunk Shot respectively, making it so that way Will-O-Wisp only has about a 7% chance to miss, and Gunk Shot only has about a 12% chance to miss, as opposed to 15 and 20. So it definitely helps with the consistency for me. I do think Weezing also has a lot of interesting Terra options. I think it depends on what your matchup is and what you're looking for on your team specifically. I know Wolfe, for his tournament run, actually ended up running Terra Ghost, being able to dodge Fake Out spam and just be able to get a guaranteed Will-O-Wisp or Taunt off on turn 1. That's a really big deal, having that option to just completely blank Fake Outs while also reducing any abilities that might be on the field, and also being able to taunt a slower Pokemon like Amoonguss, or being able to taunt a Trick Room user on turn 1 is a really, really big deal. I also think Terra Water is a good defensive typing. Even Terra Grass can be good. Just making sure that you don't have to worry about Spore from Amoonguss with the Grass type, and then Water is just a really good defensive coverage. You could also probably get away with doing Fairy also, but at that point it just invites more Steel types, which you can't really touch with your Poison Stab. But I think Water is really good just as a solid defensive typing. I wouldn't really recommend Dragon, although I can see why that would be good, being able to resist the Fire, Water, Grass core that's running around. It will make you weak to Fairy types, but you do have Gunk Shot, so if you have a way to answer that, then that would also be good. Weezing does also have a secondary form here. It has the Galarian Weezing form, which I don't think is actually any better than this form. I think having the Fairy typing is good for very specific matchups, being you have a 4x resistance to fighting moves, which isn't really going to impact you very much anyway, given that Weezing's massive physical defense. And then you have a resistance to Dark type moves, which is good, so it definitely helps into your Urshifu single strike matchup a lot, right? Being able to resist the Wicked Blow rather than being neutral to it is a big deal. You're also weak to Steel at this point, which I think is a problem. Again, you don't have the offense to respond to a Steel type. You're not going to be able to do anything. Like Heatran into this specific Weezing set completely bodies you, forces a Terra just to not get one shot, which doesn't feel great. It does get access to a couple unique Fairy moves though with this set, so that's something to consider. It gets access to Dazzling Gleam and Strange Steam, which are both good special attacks, especially with Stab Fairy. Again, not a super high special attack stat, but it is there. And then it does also get access to Play Rough. So if you were going to be running the Wide Lens anyway, again, like how I was running the Gunk Shot, Wide Lens would help with these moves with their consistency a lot also. It's something to consider. It does get access to Aromatic Mist, which I don't think is going to be very good, honestly. You're not moving very quickly, so you're not going to get this defense boost onto your partner before any big hit comes through. It does get Misty Terrain and Misty Explosion, which are both individually pretty decent moves. But overall, I think you're mainly running Weezing for Taunt and Will-O-Wisp specifically. So I think if you are going to run the Fairy type, you're going to be leaning into this stuff more, as opposed to the supportive Taunt and Will-O-Wisp shenanigans of the standard Weezing. As for how Weezing interacts with the meta, I have a list of Pokemon here, then I'll just kind of run through how it affects them. So neutralizing gas turns off all abilities, meaning that Urshifu Rapid Strike can no longer punch through Protect, which is a huge deal. If you go into a matchup where you assume or you know for a fact that their Urshifu is Scarfed, you can double Protect in front of it, take 0 damage from it, figure out what moveset it's locked itself into, and then go from there. Or you could even protect your partner Pokemon and then go for a burn onto the Urshifu and then just cripple it from for the rest of the match, pretty much for free, which is phenomenal. Tornadus has access to Prankster, but with neutralizing gas, you don't have that, meaning that you actually have a chance to either taunt, fake out, or just straight up OHKO a Tornadus before it has a chance to do anything, which is actually, I mean, I don't have to tell you, that's a big deal. Or being able to nuke its partner Pokemon next to it before it gets its Tailwind off is a really, really big deal. Amoonguss gets the access to the busted ability Regenerator, obviously, and if Amoonguss switches out, it actually doesn't heal with Regenerator, meaning that when it comes back in, it won't have healed off that damage, and it makes Amoonguss a lot more manageable, meaning that you can actually chip away at Amoonguss reliably without having to worry about it just switching out, getting all its health back, and coming back in for free. Landorus, and pretty much any Pokemon that has Intimidate, Weezing will stop Intimidate from activating, which is a really nice thing. It also stops Defiant from activating, meaning that if there's a King Gambit on the field and you go for something like an Icy Wind or even a Moonblast onto the King Gambit, and if you get a special attack drop, you're no longer being punished for it because Defiant won't activate. As for the Ruin abilities too, this is where it gets a bit, like, this is really impactful. None of the Ruin abilities will activate while Weezing is on the field, meaning that Chien-Pao Dragonite actually does a lot less damage than it would before it. All of a sudden, those big one-hit knockouts that people are calced for, those don't happen anymore, and you have a chance to respond. So if you have like a Iron Hands and Weezing out, you can very safely go for like a burn onto the Chien-Pao or onto the Dragonite, target down the Chien-Pao, and they're doing less damage. You're getting progress, you're healing with something like Iron Hands, right? You have a lot of ways to respond to that hyper offense team. It also, a notable one that I didn't think about at first is Farigiraf. So if you are running a hyper offense team with a Chien-Pao Dragonite, you can actually bring Weezing into the back, and let's say you anticipate or your opponent leads with Farigiraf and they have Armor Tail, you can actually swap Weezing in next to your, let's say, Banded Dragonite and still click Terra Normal E-Speed and absolutely chunk the Farigiraf or whatever is next to it without having to worry about Armor Tail blocking it. I say it's a really big deal for all of these. Weezing straight up can just delete, or not delete, but just neuter the usage of a lot of the top tier Pokemon right now based on how they abuse their abilities to make them so good. As for Pokemon that actually love to partner with Weezing, Roaring Moon is one of the best options, I think. Having booster energy means you actually don't have to worry about neutralizing gas because the item activates your photosynthesis. It's not the ability that's activating, it's the item. So you actually can still get your booster energy off next to a Weezing, and Roaring Moon actually has access to Tailwind. So going back to the Tornadus matchup, Tornadus at max speed hits 179, and if we go Jolly Nature here, we can very easily spec Roaring Moon to outspeed Tornadus, go for Tailwind, and Weezing actually can outspeed a Tornadus under Tailwind by just going for 90 speed here. So what I do is I've been running this set where I will invest the rest of my EVs into bulk as needed, but this will allow me to outspeed Tornadus under Tailwind, or without Prankster. I can activate my Tailwind, and then Weezing will then be faster than Tornadus because it hits 180 after the Tailwind boost, and you can taunt the Tornadus and get your Tailwind up. Meanwhile, their Tornadus does nothing, and it's actually a really funny option to respond to Tornadus. It's really, really nice. Or with the attack booster, you can also go for just a big one-hit knockout onto the Torn if you know that it's a more frail and less bulky option. You can also go for a speed booster Roaring Moon here if you wanted to do something like this and then invest your rest into the bulk. A speed booster Roaring Moon becomes a huge menace as well, being able to just outspeed every Scarf user in the format right now, with the exception of Booster Speed Bundle and Booster Speed Fluttermane. Those are the only things that will outspeed this, and there's no Prankster to worry about, so this becomes essentially the fastest Pokemon in the format, barring those other two. And if you wanted to go for like a Terra Steel to resist both Fluttermane and an Iron Bundle, then that's totally an option, right? It gets knockoff, acrobatics, Terra Flying, all that good stuff, right? It just has a lot of good options. There's a lot of good booster energy options out there, I think. I think Roaring Moon is probably the best one, but if we were to look at other options for it, we have, like, Screamtail could be good with it too, being able to go for, like, Perish songs, and Encore Disable with Weezing could be really good. Being able to get a big booster attack on like a Slitherwing could be funny, or Sandy Shocks, right, with gravity stuff. Obviously Booster Speed Fluttermane would be really good, and then it also goes for all the Quark Drive Pokemon as well. So Bundle, Hands, which like you're not really going to use that with, Iron Moth, Iron Valiant, all of these would benefit really well from being next to a Weezing. With that being said, Pokemon who don't need their abilities to function, specifically Iron Hands, are fantastic partners for it. Having Pokemon that don't have to worry about abilities just makes it so much easier to manage when you're running your own Weezing. One more combo that I wanted to talk about too is, and this is one of my personal favorites. I guess there's two more. The Dondozo Tatsugiri option in front of a Weezing is basically not a thing at this point. Because if Dondozo or Tatsugiri come out on the field next to each other while Weezing is on the field, Commander won't activate, and Dondozo doesn't have access to Unaware, so you can set up with something like a Water Ogerpon or an Iron Hands, or, sorry, not Iron Hands, King Gambit, right? Like, you have this option to just start setting up in front of these guys. They aren't doing a whole lot of damage. Dondozo's not getting its boost. It's not ignoring your boosts. Tatsugiri is just sitting there. It's a huge problem for it. So just having a Weezing in front of a Dozogiri lineup is actually a huge threat, and makes people rethink, do I even bother bringing the Dozogiri? Because if they have a Weezing, I'm in trouble. Last one I wanted to mention, Indeedee Armarouge. As someone who hates Indeedee Armarouge and Psy Spam, Indeedee can't activate its Psychic Surge while Weezing is on the field. And you can get a free taunt off onto the Indeedee, and then you can also fake out whatever is next to it, or you can fake out Indeedee, go for the taunt onto whatever's next to it. And just having the option to shut off Psychic Surge before anything happens is a huge deal. This also falls into, with the Psy Spam team, Torkoal will not get its Sun boot, or it won't get its Sun activated. Lilligant won't access Chlorophyll even if they do have Sun on the field, so let's say you bring Weezing in later for some reason. Even if the Sun is out, they will no longer have their Chlorophyll speed boost. That means that they are stuck at whatever speed tier they're at. I think they normally hit 178, right? If we did, let's see, Jolly, 172. Okay, so that means that, like, again, your Roaring Moon will always outspeed this thing in the Sun, which is a big deal. And you can just hit it with, like, an Acrobatics, right? Indeedee Armarouge is just a big thing also, right? So, like, Armarouge, I played it in a tournament yesterday. Someone was running a Weak Armor Endure set with a Scarf U-Turn Urshifu, and they would their game plan was to activate Weak Armor by going for U-Turn onto it with, like, Terra Grass. They had Weakness Policy, but with Weezing, they don't get the Weak Armor boost, meaning that I can very freely go for physical attacks and not have to worry about increasing this thing's speed by 2 stages, which is a big deal. So also, kind of going in, like, reverse order now, we've talked about how Weezing is going to be really good and how it does affect the meta. One thing to be prepared for as someone who plays Weezing, it'd be like, as if you are to play Weezing and we start to see people prepping for it, I would expect to see the Ability Shield come onto Tatsugiri pretty soon, because what this does is it actually prevents neutralizing gas from affecting the commander boost. We'll probably start to see this item pop up more and more as people play more and more Weezing, and this is both good and bad, because what it means is it's good for the people who, like, I don't think you'll see it, but if people do run Ability Shield on Urshifu, right, no matter what, they can always punch through your Pokemon. as someone who is playing Weezing, I'm fine with taking that trade if it means that someone is going to be losing an item and losing either damage or speed or survivability in exchange for me potentially bringing Weezing to the matchup. I will take that trade any day. I do not care. I think the most counterplay you can have to Weezing is something that can just threaten an Oko. So like if we're looking at like in DD Armor Rouge, right, going for like a Helping Hand Expanding Force on turn 1 to just delete this thing, or big ground type moves. So like Heatran Earth Power can be a real problem for this guy, especially like the Life Orb versions. Its special defense just isn't very high. But most of the counterplay to Weezing is like soft checks. There's no like real direct answer as far as I can tell. So I think it's really going to be an interesting time, especially now that Wolfe has won a tour. There's going to be a lot of people picking this up. Do I think you should pick up Weezing? Yes. However, if you are going to pick up Weezing, please, please, please stick with it for a while. This guy is hard to use. He is unreliable at times, especially if you're going to go for a safer like Citrus Berry item set, because Will-O-Wisp and Gunk Shot or Will-O-Wisp specifically is an inherently inaccurate and unreliable move. It is really good when you can get it to work, but it does become a problem if you're missing those hits. If you don't pivot correctly with the Weezing, something you need to be concerned about is if you switch Weezing out, all of the abilities on the field will then reactivate. So if you have like a Landorus next to your Weezing, and your opponent also has a Landorus, when you switch your Weezing out, both Intimidates will activate, which is something to be concerned about, especially if there is also like a Defiant user, or there is a terrain that you don't want from something like a Rillaboom or an Indeedee. So there are going to be a lot of mistakes that you'll make playing with Weezing. So definitely, like, if you do pick it up, just stick with it for a while, learn what it's good into, learn what it's bad into, understand what the mistakes you make are, like, because you're gonna make mistakes with this thing for sure. It's definitely not something you can just pick up and play, I don't think. People are definitely going to try that since Wolfe just won a tour. They're going to play with his team a lot, but I think people are going to understand that Weezing is a very difficult Pokemon to position around, but it does have a lot of potential. I think it's definitely one of those mons where it has a really low skill ceiling, or a really low skill floor and a really high skill ceiling, meaning that there's so much room for how you want to play with this guy. Really hard to pick him up. I guess it would be high skill floor, high skill ceiling, right? It's hard to pick him up, but it's also like really rewarding if you master it. That's what I mean. Yeah, we'll go with that. Yeah, I think it's just gonna be really good. One more quick combo and kind of like a cool tech you can do. If you pair Weezing with any of the Ogerpon, and let's say you're the Hearthflame, right? And you want to go for like a Swords Dance. You can, let's say you have Ogerpon and Landorus out on the field next to each other, right? Let's say you have like an Iron Hands instead, right? So let's say you have Hands and Ogre out on the field. You can go for a Fake Out and Swords Dance with Terastallization, right? So you're getting yourself to +3. You can then switch out the Iron Hands the second turn and protect with the Ogerpon. Switch the Iron Hands into the Weezing, shutting off the Embody aspect after it terastallizes. And at that point, the next turn, you can actually switch Weezing back out, which will then reactivate Embody aspect and give you another boost. So this would also work with, let's say, the water variant, right? You could get a +2 special defense and a +2 in your offense, essentially in the first 3 turns, and only having to protect once and maybe risk 1 turn of damage. That's it. Like, the ability you have to just boost this thing with Weezing is actually ridiculous, being able to switch in and out. If you pair this with something like a Landorus too, and you're switching Weezing for Landorus, you're getting Intimidate cycling, you're reactivating your Embody aspect, and you're shutting off their abilities too, which is just like a really, really big deal. That's just the theme of this video, is Weezing is a really big deal. That's all it is. I think that pretty much covers everything that I wanted to talk about. Weezing is just going to be one of those Pokemon that we're just going to see more and more creative strategies come up with it, and I'm really excited for it. Again, I think you should definitely play with Weezing if you're watching this. If you are too, if you do plan on playing it, let me know how you're going to do it, because I feel like, again, there's a lot of different ways you can. See if there's anything different, see if there's anything I missed, any cool combos you can think of. I know a lot of people have been running ability shield next to Weezing also. This is something I should have mentioned earlier. And this video is going to be so out of order. I'm so sorry. I just wanted to get it out since this is my second recording of it, and it's different now, and I don't know. You can also run ability shield next to something like Weezing, or next to Weezing. And let's say you have a Arcanine and ability shield. You can actually lead these two and then get an Intimidate off in front of your opponent, even with Weezing being on the field. So you can actually get an Intimidate off. They can't. They're just at a deficit at the start of the game, and that's a really, really cool thing to have, right? And then this also works on, that means you're also intimidating stuff like Inner Focus Dragonite or Oblivious Dondozo. Anyway, let me know what you're going to do. This is going to be all out of order. I'm going to try and edit it and put it together in a cohesive thing, but at this point I just need to start putting these videos out because I've been needing to do that and I haven't been. This is what I get for procrastinating. I was making a video talking about how the potential of Weezing, and then Wolfe goes and wins a whole tournament with it. Classic Wolfe shenanigans, world champ diff, am I right? That's gonna do it. Let me know how you would play Weezing. Let me know if there's anything I missed, and then I'll try and put some more videos out soon. And until then, I hope you guys have a good day and take it easy. Goodbye.